we have some wonderful faculty who are going to talk to us. This is actually going to be a 4-part series that you won't want to miss. It's going to take us straight through the fall. We're going to talk about 4 very important aspects of counseling. I won't ruin the surprise. You'll just have to wait for your next invite to see what the next one's about. But tonight we're going to talk about theoretical orientation. And as a faculty, we love talking about this. So I'm not going to steal all the thunder, and I'm not going to steal all the time, even though I probably could. I am going to ask faculty who are here, who are not here to present tonight, introduce yourself and say what your orientation is. I'll start. I'm Dr. Foster, your department chair, and I'm an existential therapist. Dr. Colarusso, tag, you're it. I see you.
I am Dr. Colarusso, and I do a lot of person-centered and CBT therapy. Tag Dr. Troutman.
No fair, I'm presenting, but I am also an existentialist with a hint of Gestalt.
Oh.
I will tag Dr. Oots Moore.
Hi, I'm Dr. Ruth Oots Moore. So I am very person-centered, and then I incorporate some CBT. I do child-centered play therapy, which is basically person-centered, but it's with children. So anyway, and then, but in my work with parents, I do incorporate a lot of Adlerian theory, because I really focus on Dreiker's like goals of children's misbehavior, if you aren't familiar, but looking at like the purpose and goal-oriented behavior to help parents understand that children aren't just doing quote unquote bad things, but there's a purpose behind the behavior. So I do use some Adlerian approaches with my work with parents and of children.
Let's see, Dr. Brown. Tag, Dr. Brown, you're it.
Oh, okay. Dr. Andy Brown, and integrative. I use existential, like kind of humanistic approaches, very kind of Yalom informed, and but my focus is trauma. So I use a lot of power therapies, and I integrate those concepts, pretty much most of the time. Dr. Christy E.
Hello. Well, I'm gonna sound like Dr. Brown, because I do very much the same thing with person-centered, humanistic, and then very much brain-based theories. And I'll be one that's presenting, so I'll say more about that later. Who hasn't gone yet? And
Dr. Dalton.
Okay, Dr. Dalton. I don't see
Dr. Sarah Dalton. I primarily use a lot of family systems, a lot of CBT, and a lot of brief solution focused, because I'm a sex therapist and people usually want some sort of solution. So that's that. Dr. Clark, are you presenting?
I am, but I'm glad to overview. Hello, everyone. I work with children and teens, so kids, child and adolescent counselor. Very much echo Dr. Oots Moore. I do child-centered play. I do a lot of play-based and creative expressive arts work. But with teens, I'll talk a little bit less about that tonight. With teens, I do a lot of trauma-focused theories like DBT, EMDR, family systems oriented work as well. So, and existential therapy with teens, especially over the pandemic. I realized how much they needed that space. So those are my initial orientations. Who else hasn't gone?
Dr. Pickens.
I'm Dr. Brian Pickens. I'm about as existential as a therapist probably can be. More specifically, I suppose, I do a lot of emotion-focused therapy, which has a lot of roots in existential theory. And so I do a lot of that with couples. So I don't know who else is. Dr. Erickson is here. So attack her.
I am, and I'm presenting, but I am happy to share with you folks what my theories are. Reality theory is my primary theory. I work with adolescents, and I like, in addition to reality, I use CBT and solution focused, and sometimes Gestalt. Who else is not gone?
Dr. TRW.
Dr. TRW, you're it.
Well, thank you. I'm Tiffany Rush Wilson. I'm the Associate Department Chair, and I would actually say my theoretical orientation is Melkert's biopsychosocial theory, which allows me to pull in from a couple of different places. One is feminist theory, one is multicultural theory, and the other one is probably pretty heavily DBT at this point. And Dr. Eldridge, did you go? You did? So I don't know who's left.
I think I
Who else?
see Dr. Smith.
You see here? Okay, Dr. Smith, you're it.
See her on mute. If we missed you and you're a faculty member, just pop it in the chat, give a hello and what your theory of choice is. And I'm actually going to turn it over. I'm going to let Dr. Clark and Dr. Erickson flip a coin to see who goes first. Don't everybody start at once.
Okay, I win.
Okay.
I
Go ahead,
win.
go ahead. Got it.
All right, I'm gonna share my screen. There's not many, there's only 3 slides, but I'm gonna put them up only because you folks can see here. All right. So when I first learned about theories, reality theory caught my eye, and I think you all can relate to this. When you're first looking at theories, there's a bit of a blur that happens. But with reality, there was no blur, and it has stuck with me ever since. The reason why I like it is because first, it offers choice and empowerment. It's simple and familiar. Why familiar? Because we use this as a decision-making process in our lives every day. The founder of choice reality theory, Dr. William Glasser, he had it right when he determined we all do what we do to meet 5 key needs. And those needs are survival, love and belonging, power, freedom, and fun. Who doesn't want to have fun, right? When you listen to your client's story, I challenge you to see if you can identify which of the 5 needs they're trying to get met. Sometimes it's more than one, but see if you can do that. So now let's get into the meat and potatoes of reality, the step-by-step recipe that you would use in session. Okay, it's just this. I call it a recipe. WDEP, wants, doing, evaluate, and plan. So if you remember earlier, I said that we use this daily in our lives. I like to share the example of shopping for clothes. So I'm seeing a few smiles there. We all do it. We know what we want. We know our size. And so we set out to the store to find what we want. Color, fit, fashion, it takes a while, though we eventually narrow our choice and buy something or not. The same approach is easily applied to a client session. So let's start with the W. Either listening to what the client says or by asking them directly, we determine their wants. I might ask them, if you could pinpoint, what is it that you want? This also works for us in knowing what they want to accomplish in counseling. So it's a good question. Once we hear what they want and we use our foundational skills, we learn more about what they're doing to get what they want, the D. So I might say, walk me through what you've tried so far. This gives you both a clear picture at their attempt to solve the problem. Similarly, when we go back to the example of shopping for clothes, our doing, what are we doing? We try on different styles. We look in the mirror to see how it looks on our body. We move around to see how it feels, or we'll visit several different stores. Sometimes it works and to no avail, other times. So then now what? Okay. So we've been talking about what they've tried so far. The next step is to evaluate what they're doing. Is it working? Those of you that are familiar with the Dr. Phil show, he is an avid user of reality. And when he evaluates their solution attempts, he will ask, how's that working for you? Does that ring a bell to anybody? Sometimes they might not be doing enough of what they should be doing, Other times, what they're doing, it just flat out just doesn't work. When that happens, here is when we and our client co-create a new plan. Some folks might also call this homework. So then we keep the client in charge and we encourage them to think of alternate things they could try. Now, you would be surprised, but when I ask this of children and youth and say, okay, what are some things you could do differently? You would be amazed at how much they come up with. They are really good at it. So this is why I like this theory, because they're empowered and they have choice. And we know that if they aren't a part of the solution, they probably aren't going to do it, and it probably won't work. So we give them the choice, ultimate control of what they'd like to do with their guidance. And the theory is effective for children, youth, and adults. And if you haven't tried it, I say give it a try. Here's a few resources at the end for you to check it out if you'd like it. And that's all I have. There you go. Dr. Clark, now you're it.
Man, I didn't know we were doing slides and all that. Look at Dr. Erickson up here. All right, that was awesome. Thank you, Dr. Erickson. While you were doing that, I whipped up 22 slides real quick to go with my presentation. So I'm going to load that real quick. No, but for real, I actually have a couple slides from a separate theoretical presentation that I just recently put together. So I will share a little bit from that because it's obviously very relevant. Okay, so let's look at my approach here. And I will reiterate and say that I'm very much integrative. And since I work with kids and teens, it's all about evidence-based practice and what works with kids. I've done a lot of research at this point that is very clear and that has added to the literature base that it's clear that kids are not little adults in terms of counseling. So if any of you were my client, that is a very different and distinct process than if a 4-year-old was my client. And we cannot treat kids like little adults and use the same theories in the same way with the same questions and the same way of being when we are in the room with a first grader, right? Or when with a 4th grader, right? So I want to talk a little bit about what that looks like to take into account theoretical approaches with kids. Especially because technically you can graduate from a program like this, any CACREP accredited program, and not have any required hours with counseling children, and then go out in the field and try to treat them like little adults. That is an issue, and we have to be mindful that theories that align with a 40-year-old don't necessarily align with a 5-year-old. So I use primarily theories that are play-based and expressive arts-based. And so what I want to share is some points around using child-centered play-based methods. So let me start here. Okay. So this is part of my presentation. I'm not going to go through every slide to spare you that, but a couple things. Those are my babies, so just a plug for how cute they are. I'm in the middle of working through some research around building out standards for what makes counseling children unique. And one of the main things we have to consider is children communicate through play. And so the theory that I want to highlight tonight is child-centered play therapy. And Dr. Utzmoor already mentioned that. I want to focus on the core guidelines for what it looks like to be a child-centered play therapist and what it looks like to be a child-centered therapist. Virginia Axline basically adapted Rogerian principles to play into working with young children. And so these are the 8 guidelines that we have to consider in working with children. And some of them are pretty straightforward how they apply from very classic humanistic Rogerian principles: authenticity, non-judgment, a warmth, with kids. But we also, there's some unique guidelines here as well. So I do a lot of non-directive play-based methods. And what that looks like is sometimes kids come into my office and I just meet them where they are, accept them just as they are. If they come in wanting to punch things and release a lot of aggression, I don't say, well, today we're actually going to talk about your mom or something that happened at school, right? It almost feels odd just even saying that could be a thing. I meet them where they're at. So if they need to release some energy, I meet them in that space. We'll use the punching bag materials I have in my office. We'll go outside if it's a nice day and I can have some privacy out there with them. We'll throw a ball, right? But whatever it is, I meet them in that space. I allow them to express themselves freely and have very little guidelines in terms of what they can't do, right? I generally say don't take a break, right? We can't take a bunch of stuff out of the room or else other friends won't be able to play. And we're not going to try intentionally to break my stuff, even though it happens all the time because a lot of feelings are released in my room. Very much like Rogers, Virginia Axline stated, so we have to understand that kids have the capacity to solve their problems, make choices, and make changes. I'm talking to 3-year-old, 4-year-old right here, that they have the capacity to be resilient and to work through things, not necessarily through talking about it directly, but through play, through art, through creative means. And we have to be willing to engage in that and get out of this, I have to just talk directly through, talk therapy. The kids are the captain of the ship. They lead all aspects of therapy. It develops at a natural pace without hurrying things along, like to address certain topics. And as anyone who works with kids will say, a big hurdle with this is the parents and helping parents understand that things will not be solved in 2 sessions of child-centered therapy or play therapy. It's just not going to happen. But we do have to involve parents because kids operate in a system. So that's another part of this theory, is allowing parents to be involved, but in a very specific way. So they understand what's going on, but they're not in the room every time, all the time, to kind of impact the therapeutic process as well. So these are the core conditions. And again, I use a lot of non-directive methods. So it's not a lot of set kind of interventions. It's more, I set the play space very specifically. I use a lot of toys, a lot of art, a lot of what we call make-believe, dress up, materials, and kids enter my counseling room and they just go. They express themselves, and I meet them in that space, reflect feeling, track their behavior. I see you picked up that. You really want to show me this, right? It's not a lot of, hey, come over here, let's do this. That would be me leading. That would be me being the captain of the ship, and that's not what this theory is about. So these are some of the basics, and I really just kind of wanted to highlight where kind of the research is heading towards, in working with kids. And that's, you have to have not necessarily a advanced and credential in play therapy, but you have to know how to apply the basics of child-centered play therapy. You have to know the basics of evidence-based practice for applying theory with kids, because they're not just little adults. You have to speak the language of children. It's not always with verbal and with words. You have to know how to advocate for children, sometimes in court, sometimes with guardians or other professionals. And again, you have to apply the core Rogerian principles of, congruence, empathy, non-judgment, things like that with kids. And that can look all sorts of ways. So I think I kept that to a little under 10 minutes. I wanted to wrap up here, but that's a couple pieces of information. I'd love to talk more. Feel free to reach out wherever you are in the program if you want to talk more about how to apply these kind of concepts with kids. I'm very passionate about this, and thank you for listening and letting me share.
Who would you like to tag, Dr. Clark?
Oh boy, there's Dr. Eldridge.
Okay, thank you. So hello, everyone. I'm Dr. E, and I'm going to talk about kind of a combination of a couple different theories that I often piece together. As I mentioned before, underlying foundation of person-centered and humanistic theories. So that belief that we have unconditional positive regard for our client no matter what. It doesn't mean we have to agree with things they have done, but we do see the value and the worth and the potential in all of our clients. So I work with a lot of clients who are survivors of complex trauma, and in the nature of some of their traumatic experiences and survival experiences, they have done things that most of us would hope we would never have to imagine doing. And so being able to sit with someone and really genuinely and authentically embody this regard, positive regard for our clients, I just think is imperative no matter what else we're adding on top of that. And within that, you build the strong therapeutic alliance. So that's another piece of both PCT and humanistic counseling. Then what I'd like to add in are some of the neurobiological models that we're getting more and more information and research and understanding about in language that makes sense, even without being a neurologist or researcher. So some of those that I use, polyvagal theory is one that I use a lot, and I don't have slides, but I do have images. So I'm going to share this in a couple images that are brain-based. So I want to start actually with this one. So this one is the polyvagal chart. And when we talk about polyvagal, we're talking about one of our 10 cranial nerves. So it's a major nerve in our body that has tons of influence on our nervous system, both in our how we get activated and how we calm down, how we regulate between those states. So this cranial nerve goes from the base of our brain, it spans out through our face, through our chest, our lungs, our heart, all the way down into our digestive system. And it has a lot to do with all of this stuff. When we are I like this image because think of it as like a stoplight. Green is like, good, we're go. We can just kind of keep moving along, go with the flow. That's when what we call our ventral vagal aspect of the nerve is engaged. And I'm going to try not to go into the depths of this, but so this part of the nerve is engaged and we feel good. We feel calm. We feel connected. We feel like we can be curious and creative and just like our best self can really shine. When our nervous system starts to detect something is off, something might not be right, and this all has to do with our internal smoke detector, which is our amygdala. So our amygdala is constantly scanning our environment, always, always, always looking for anything that feels even close to a threat. And especially if you have survived difficult or traumatic experiences, is looking for anything that feels similar to that. So your amygdala might go off and be like, warning, warning, fire alarm, smoke detectors going off, something's not right. Our sympathetic nervous system kicks into gear. And that's when we come into this yellow window. So the yellow is like caution, like, let's check around, let's notice. We're noticing that something doesn't feel right. Let's check to see if there's evidence for that. And our system is doing that before this part of our brain, frontal lobe neocortex, which is where all of our higher order thinking, when you're doing all your homework, you're in that part of your brain. Our nervous system is already off to the races before that part even comes online to think about, oh, something feels off. Is there a threat here? So we go into that fight or flight response, immediately. That comes first. So moving towards to fight, like, all right, I can kind of get bigger. My adrenaline's going to start pumping. I'm maybe going to look a little angry, a little tougher. Or we might go into a flight, which is, I'm going to pull back a little bit, or I'm going to get the heck out of here and run away. However, we can't always do one or both of those things. And when, especially for childhood trauma, when a child has gone through something like an abuse situation, like a trafficking situation, war, refugee experiences, all kinds of stuff where they can't fight and they can't flee. They just don't have the power or the access, or they just can't do it. We have another survival tactic, which is to go into freeze. And so a different part of that vagus nerve kicks in and it helps us shut everything down. So we go immobile, and it really is like freeze is very physiological. It's very literal. This is where dissociation happens. This is where missing time happens. This is where like I don't feel anything in my body because we're not connected to that pain sensory experience, because we're surviving by just kind of plain dead, honestly. Like if you ever watch wildlife videos and you see, you know, the animal that's being hunted and they, you know, play dead or they fall down and then the predator goes away, they will then eventually finally stand up and shake it off because their whole nervous system has been in a frozen state. So I often walk through this with clients and kind of talk about like, do you recognize any of these? What does it look like when you're in your yellow space? And we'll like write it down. And what does it look like when you're in red? And how do you know when you're moving from yellow to red? And then I'll keep doing some psychoed and saying, okay, notice the way this curve goes. You can't move from red and pop right down to green. You have to go back through yellow when you come back out of it. So for some of my clients who have dissociative experiences, who have spent years of their life in this red, to come into yellow feels very threatening. Like, ooh, panic, worry, I don't like the sound of that, and they might pop back up to red. And so it's kind of educating, like this is where we're headed, and we're going to come down to green, but it might feel unfamiliar. You know, you might actually feel quote unquote safer up in red because you've spent so much time there that familiarity gives this false sense of safety, even though for your nervous system, it's saying this is really, really dangerous and we have to be here to freeze to survive. And then of course, over here, there's lots of other good stuff that I'm not going to go into, but it just kind of connects with what else is happening in our bodies, from digestion to heart rate to blood pressure, to sleep, all of that stuff. So then I want to show you one other image. This one is a little bit more basic. This is the window of tolerance. So I will often draw this out with clients to say, you know, most of us go through our days. Let's imagine there's a line right here through the middle of this green box. Most of us go through our days and we've got, you know, kind of highs and lows, and you know, we're not automatons. We don't go through a flat line baseline. Nothing's going to impact us. So we might have highs and lows, but there are points in time where something might happen where we go up, we get activated, and we go up here to the top of our window. So this orange bar is the top of our window of tolerance. And something can happen where it is beyond our capacity to tolerate it, to reasonably regulate or manage our responses, and we get out of that window. And on the high end, we call it hyperarousal. So this is where we might have panic attacks. We might have rage. We might just feel so like vibrating. It's a very physiological, back to that yellow, that corresponds with that yellow bar in the polyvagal curve. And then we talk about going down to the other side. So if we go down here to the purple, this is the hypoarousal, and this equates to that red bar of the polyvagal chart. So we can go out of our window on the high side, and we can go out of our window on the low side. Our work in our therapy is to help you get to know your nervous system, to be able to have a relationship with it, to build skills, coping resources that are nervous system based, so that if you're feeling shut down, we know what activities we can do to get you just back in the window. We don't have to get you back to baseline. We just have to get you back in the window, because that's the window of stuff you can tolerate. And then you can use your other coping skills to kind of balance out. So resources we might use on the low end, if you're in this hypoarousal, might be grounding techniques. So let's use your 5 senses. Let's, you know, smell a lemon or hold ice or count five things in my office that I can see that are blue. things that engage our five senses are grounding things. If we're on the high side, we need to calm our nervous system. One of my go-to, and I use this, I just used it this weekend, so I promise it works, is I call it the S breath. Some people call it the snake breath, but I don't like snakes, so I don't like saying that. But basically, you put your teeth together, and I invite you all to try this wherever you are. Put your teeth together. Just take a normal inhale, and then as long as you can make it, exhale through your closed teeth. So it's just... And I do that like maybe 3 times. And I don't know if you can feel it within you, but I can feel, it feels like this in my nervous system, like just a slow calming, and it just works. So do, a few of those. You can do it in your car, in traffic. You can do it before or after you see a tough client. It's just so easy and effective. So those are some of the neurobiological resources that I use and teach clients, because then I use EMDR and brain spotting a lot with my clients. Some of you are probably pretty familiar with EMDR, which is based on nervous system, and it engages bilateral stimulation, which is either visual, so following visual back and forth, or you can have earphones that go back and forth in your ears, or we also have little buzzers. Some therapists have actually what we call a light bar, and you just follow this like electronic light back and forth. So the whole premise of EMDR is that if you can pull up something that feels activating, something that feels kind of stuck, like a traumatic memory, or just something like that you frequently get triggered by, or you just can't get over, you pull that up, and there are a few prompting questions, and then you do this bilateral stimulation while you are thinking about and feeling in your body, thinking about the negative beliefs you have associated with that target. And by going through the back and forth, that lessens the distress. It engages the part of your brain, that limbic system, the emotional part of your brain where the traumatic emotional stuff is stored. And it just allows your nervous system to do what it can naturally do, which is process and heal, but it's letting you do it in an environment that is no longer threatening. So you experienced it in an environment that was threatening, so it didn't get to the part of your brain where you can make sense of it. Now we're pulling it back out of that part of your brain, reprocessing it, and letting it kind of settle. So that's very basic EMDR. And then brain spotting, we use the same idea with accessing your limbic system for that traumatic stuff, but we use your visual gaze. So you have a pointer like this, and brain spotting is based on the theory that where we look visually impacts how we feel. And so we'll think of, I was just doing this today with a client, we'll think of something that feels troubling, and I'll pull this up, and we'll just kind of go across the field of vision typically very slowly. I'm going really fast. And there will be a spot wherever the client is tracking this as they're thinking about the upsetting thing, where they will just start to have reactions, activation, tearfulness, heat, blinking, coughing, twitching. It's all the ways that our body stores this traumatic material. And so by holding that gaze while the client is thinking about that topic, same thing with the EMDR, it allows it to get reprocessed and move to this other, the hippocampus part of our memory that lets it kind of get consolidated, and we make sense of it now in a safe environment. So gosh, I could go on and on. The other thing that I was going to talk about that I'm not, but if anybody wants to talk about it later where we have more time, is parts of self work. So that might be internal family systems, developmental needs meeting strategy, or with my dissociative clients, literally their internal self states, their internal parts. So getting to work with them just like you would in family counseling, but with all aspects of a client internally. So I will hold off on that because I can just go on and on. I think Dr. Troutman, I think you're going tonight as well. Can I pass it over to you?
Of course, and clearly I did not understand the requirements of the assignment. So I expect to see some feedback in the rubric from Dr. Foster after we're done, which is fine. That's totally cool. I did not create a PowerPoint. And I'll have to be honest with you, we're just outside of Res 2 Live Lab. So I'm tired, probably how my students are as well, but that's totally fine. So with my approach, it's very much existential with a hint of Gestalt. So when we're thinking about theories, it's really important to know that it's really the lens of how we see the change process, right? So it also helps us filter out the client's narratives as well, right? Because we're in session and we get this long narrative from our clients, and it's like, so what do I do with all that? Our theory helps us to kind of filter through all that and pick up just what we need as we consider the change process. And it is a really philosophical approach that gives you lots of leeway. And a lot of opportunities to integrate different parts of different theories, as long as you're grounding yourself in the foundations of existentialism. And how I do it is going to be much different than how Dr. Foster does it, than how Dr. Brown does it, because within this existential theoretical orientation, we all just make it our own, right? So it's very, very, very clinician generated and very client specific. So in this theoretical orientation, we're talking about these big things like why, what's our purpose, what does it all mean? And we're also looking at this through the context of what does it all mean, what's our purpose in a world that really inherently is meaningless, right? Some folks will say that, well, faith guides me, and that's great, faith will guide you, but we cannot prove that as well. And as existentialists, we understand that we need to find some type of meaning. We need to make sense of it all, right? And it's really less about the symptoms that our clients present with and more about how they make sense of those symptoms and what those mean to them. So I'm depressed, okay? So you're experiencing symptoms of depression. Tell me what that looks like. Tell me what being depressed does for you. What does it mean for you? So in trying to understand how people make meaning of their lives, we actually try to shift from the broad philosophical why, which is a really big concept for a lot of people to tackle. And we try to shift to the somewhat concrete of the what's as we try to discover meaning. So it's less about the big question of why, it's more about the what. What is keeping us stuck? What is contributing to the depression? So I'll give you an example of this client I'm dealing with right now who has an opportunity to take a new job. So he's really struggling with this whole, what do I do? Should I do this? Should I do that? Here are the benefits and costs of staying here. Here are the benefits and costs of staying here. And why is this so freaking hard? So what I've tried to do is try to get him to understand that people typically feel really bound by their decisions, which is completely contrary to the existentialist thought of we need to recognize our own freedom in a situation and the freedom to make our own choices. So in his feeling bound, it's like, well, tell me what that feeling bound is like. Tell me how that functions for you. Tell me where this came from. And it's also trying to separate him from the expectations, these shoulds. I should take this job, or I should stay at my current job because I don't belong in the new job because I'm not qualified. So tell me about the not qualified. Tell me about how keeping yourself stuck works for you. What does that mean for you? So as we're working with our clients through this whole anxiety of choice, we're really trying to understand, how did we get here? How did we understand that, one, I have to have so much anxiety about this, and that if I make this choice, I am stuck in it forever? Well, how did you understand or develop meaning of being stuck in it forever? And we really get to this aspect of locus of control as well. So how are things impacting you? Do you impact the world? Does the world impact you? How does that work for you? And we really try to move people towards this internal locus of control that you actually can make whatever decision you like. Granted, it will have repercussions and implications, but you can genuinely make whatever decision you want. And as your therapist, I'm just here to walk this path with you and to process this with you. You have the solutions. You know what you can and cannot do. It's my job is to help you discover that. And in the end, it's really trying to complete the gestalt, right? Because in my point of view, and the way I see change, it's like once we understand the meaning, how we've described it, how we determined it, it completes our overall selves. It's like, now I get it. I understood this part of myself, this part of myself, and this part of myself, but I didn't understand the small part of myself as it pertains to meaning making, which actually has so much impact. So in the end, I really try to help my clients complete that gestalt. How do we make you a whole person, and how do you deal with these effectively on your own going forward? So that is my perspective. That is my theoretical approach. I think I took the least time of everybody, and that is okay, I think. Again, it'll be reflected in the rubric that I receive. So yeah, if anybody's interested in more discussion with existentialism, I love the philosophical approach and just having that discussion and just meaning making, and just, I'm a really curious person as well. So when I'm sitting with my clients, I'm like, oh, I want to know how you came here. How did this work for you? How did you develop this meaning? So sometimes it's really difficult for clients to even think about that because they're so focused on if this, then that. And I'm like, how about if this, what's possible? How about that? That's a lot more exciting, but it's also very scary for clients because they're so used to being locked into what they're doing. They're locked into being depressed, or they're locked into being anxious, and they're petrified of what life looks like without being anxious, without being depressed. And they're like, I'm going to avoid that. So I'm going to keep doing what I'm doing. So what does that mean for you to keep doing what you're doing then? What does that do for you? How's that working out for you? You know, hate to bring it back to Dr. Phil, but like, I just think it's a wonderful interaction, and it's really like making that connection with your client and just really having that conversation, helping them see the possibilities that they have, not just the expectations that they have to meet, or the goals and things that from other people that they should try to achieve. What do you want to achieve for yourself? And it's very empowering. And I really enjoy working with clients from that perspective. And that is my spiel.
Dr. Moore. Or Dr. McCormick. Let's go, Dr. McCormick.
Okay, so I clearly also did not understand the assignment because I did not put together any sort of PowerPoint or anything like that. I just showed up to come and talk, which is totally fine. So my theoretical orientation is actually feminist therapy, and feminist therapy is what I use in session. It is what I use in my clinical supervision sessions, and it is also what I tend to pull from in the classroom setting as well. I was first exposed to feminist theory as an undergraduate student. I got a minor in women and gender studies while I was working on my bachelor's degree, and was really trying to find this place that merged these two things together that I really enjoyed. The idea of psychology and the idea of feminist theory. And I happened to stumble upon feminist therapy, and just it resonated with me so much. So when we think about feminist theory and feminist therapy, there are a few core tenets that come with that. Some of those being that we are looking at power analysis in the not only in the therapy setting and what that client is experiencing in their own daily lives, but also like in the therapeutic alliance and the therapeutic relationship as well. Something that's really important in feminist therapy is this idea of egalitarianism, right? And so we know that as counselors, that we are in a hierarchical system with our clients, right? And so that's part of the reason why our code of ethics is written the way it is, that we can't be friends with clients, we don't have sexual relationships with clients, and so on and so forth. And so one of the ideas within feminist therapy is that we are analyzing that power dynamic and that power structure with our clients frequently and often. And it's the same thing that we do as supervisors and supervisees as well. identifying that power analysis and making that relationship as egalitarian as it can be, with the idea and the recognition that that power dynamic is still going to be there. It's going to continue to remain. So power analysis is a big part of feminist therapy. The idea of examining gender roles as well as gender identity are very important components of feminist therapy as well. An analysis of gender identity within that social construct, right? And you know, I think about, with regards to, you know, the fact that I pull from feminist therapy and the population that I serve. So my area of clinical focus is perinatal mood and anxiety disorders. I also see birth trauma, and I see a lot of women in my clinical practice. And a lot of those women have like various different medical traumas, chronic health conditions, suffer from chronic fatigue, fibromyalgia, autoimmune disorders, and so on. And so there are several occasions and instances where a lot of the power dynamics and the power structure that we're talking about is what they've experienced in the healthcare system. And that sort of some of the excuse me, some of the experiences that they've had that have really sort of removed their power, be it through trauma and traumatic experiences, or be it through the clinical diagnoses and so on and so forth. And so one of the ways that we also engage in power analysis is looking at how we as counselors can help our clients regain power in their own lives. And I think that that's really important with trauma as well. As Dr. Eldridge mentioned, there are so many of us that work in trauma and with traumatic stress that hear such heartbreaking stories about clients that have had these experiences where a lot of their power and control has been removed from them. And so one of the things that I think makes feminist therapy really great is we have the ability to help those clients look at their own power and to take back some of that power and control in their own life, and to help foster the growth of that power and control in their own life as well. I think is really, really great. I'm also an EMDR therapist too. Dr. Eldridge did a great job of giving that brief overview of EMDR therapy. And in a lot of ways, I have found using EMDR therapy to be really complementary to feminist therapy, especially with regards to, again, going back to that power and helping clients find that empowerment that they've lost throughout various traumatic experiences in their own life. So that is my theoretical orientation and interventions that I use in a nutshell.
Thank you, Dr. McCormick. Dr. Moore, did you want to come on and say anything else? Okay, we have some time for, let me see how much time we have. We have about 4 minutes for rapid questions. And if you put your question in the chat, I will ask the instructors. So if you have a question, pop it in the chat for a really rapid round of Jeopardy here. I have how does feminist theory function with clients of color, Dr. McCormick?
Yeah, so that's a great question. And I think as time has gone on, feminist therapy also looks a lot at intersectionality, the intersectionality of our clients with regards to social class, systemic racism, and culture in general. And so feminist therapy tends to be seen as a multicultural therapy. And I think that oftentimes with clients of color, we're talking about a lot of, disparities that have happened in their own lives, their experiences they've had with racism, systemic racism, and so on and so forth. And there are a lot of ways to provide power analysis of that oppression that has been faced by those folks within the therapeutic setting.
Thank you. Dr. Clark, a question for you. Do you think person-centered play therapy can work with adults?
Yep. Short answer, yes, absolutely can. Play therapy methods can work. I do Lego therapy, I do play therapy with teens and young adults. Absolutely. It's another way of communicating, and it's a way that anyone can communicate regardless of your chronological age.
And I just want to add that while I don't see children anymore in my practice, I use play therapy some. And part of the reason is if we think back to how we all learned to make sense of the world, it was probably play. And so sometimes it can help take our clients to places they wouldn't otherwise go. Let's see. How did you all decide where to specialize? Let me see. Dr. Troutman, I'm going to give you that one.
It's really just trying to figure out how you make sense of the world, right? And as we move through, or as y'all move through your program, I've told folks that I've interviewed before, how you come into your program will be fundamentally different from how you leave your program. And it's because you're starting to see things through a different perspective with a different lens. And you're like, wow, I didn't know that this is what it all looked like. I didn't realize that this was my own capacity or how I understood things. So as you move through and as you kind of develop and blossom into this clinician, you're like, well, this is how I make sense of the world. So I'm going to take from this theory how I make sense of the world and how they're making sense of the world. And as you even progress as a practicing clinician post-graduation, you'll probably find yourself moving more towards an integrative approach at times too, where it's like, I'm going to take a little bit from here, a little bit from here, a little bit from here. And in the end, it's like, what is really effective with this particular client that's right in front of me right now? So it really can be very dynamic, and you're really just focusing on the needs of the client. But in the end, while I am integrative, I ground myself in the existential approach of things, because that's how I make sense of the world. So that's how I bring the me into therapy.
Dr. Erickson, thoughts on internet addiction? You're muted.
I have thoughts. What thoughts would you like to know about that?
General question, not geared at anyone specifically. So let's go with, is it a thing?
It is a thing. It definitely is a thing.
If you had a client in your office, would you still use reality therapy if you had a client in your office who met criteria for an internet addiction?
I would use part of it, but I would use other theories as well. So even though reality is my foundational theory, I do use other theories depending on what the client brings into the session.
Thank you. Let's see. Let me see if I've covered them all. Where are we with progress on dealing with emotional trauma and stress in terms of diagnosis in the DSM? I would like to table that question for the diagnosis town hall, if possible. I'll answer and say I think we're light years from where we need to be, but we're closer than we've ever been. And I challenge Dr. Let's see, Dr. E. Can you add any insight to that?
Will you say it again? I was answering questions in the chat.
Sure. Where are we with progress on dealing with emotional trauma and stress in terms of diagnosis in the DSM? I said closer than we've been, but farther than we need to be.
Oh my gosh, that's the perfect way of answering it. I think the more of us us, meaning all of us, faculty and students alike, who are speaking in that language and advocating for that awareness of the impact of all forms of trauma on the expression of, symptomatology and just the expression of the human experience as injury in more cases than it is disorder. The more we can carry that language forth, the more impact we're going to have.
Dr. Brown, are you still on the call, Dr. Brown? Can you come on for a second? I think you use hypnotherapy. Whoever had emails, questions about hypnotherapy, just blow up Dr. Brown's email after this, since he didn't come on to answer the question. Let's see. Let me see if I got everything. Do any of you use out-of-the-box approaches to get clients who are new to therapy comfortable with being in this environment, and where they will eventually be exposed and vulnerable? I'd say the most out-of-the-box thing you can do is remember your basic skills. They will never fail you. Dr. E answered those. How long until you establish your counselor identity and theoretical orientations? They're still evolving. So if you think this is a place where you're going to hit a finish line, I want to challenge you that you won't. But Dr. Clark, what do you want to add to that?
Yeah, I think it absolutely evolves. I'm still there. I mean, I just added how to do EMDR with kids, right? I did that training last year, 2 years ago, and now I use puppets to do bilateral stimulation, right? Like I used to be no way, I'll never use EMDR with kids because it just can't be done. And now here I am tapping with puppets, so yes, out of the box to me is evolving evidence-based practices in ways that you didn't really acknowledge could be done before, and so yeah, it's constant evolution.
Constant. All right. I'm going to give this one to Dr. McCormick. How do you guys feel is the best way to get involved with the political climate, especially as it relates to your specific theories and client base, i.e. gender identity versus current climate, pushing back those boundaries, or children within welfare systems? I think by advocating politically versus advocating for the individual. And I chose you because yours is a social constructivist theory. So what are your thoughts?
So there is a lot of that going on right now. And I would say that one of the ways that you could choose to be involved in terms of advocacy is being involved with SAGE, which is a division of the American Counseling Association. SAGE has a committee that's devoted to just following those House bills and Senate bills as they move through the state legislature and the federal legislature. Actually, one of my supervisees is one of the committee members specific to that advocacy committee. And they are doing some really, really great work, but it is a great way to be involved, to be able to allow your voice to be heard, your professional ideologies, and the things that we know as clinicians. It's a great way to be involved and to allow folks at the state level to hear what we have to say, as well as at the federal level. So that's SAGE, and that's I can't remember right off the top of my head what SAGE stands for, but it's the LGBTQ plus division of the American Counseling Association.
Dr. Troutman, do you want to add anything?
I would, actually. I would add under everything that Dr. McCormick said is also empowering your clients to engage in this process as well. Because a lot of these folks feel very out of control. Again, the world is happening to me. The legislature is happening to me. And it's like, well, let's flip that around real quick. Actually, you can actually invoke change with the legislature as well, with your vote, with getting other folks who are on board, other parents, other people who think like you do. And unfortunately, I think we've gotten so much into a climate where it's just, I'm going to stay in my bubble and I'm not going to interact or engage anyone because you never know, right? This person might be on this side, that side, but empowering your client to get into the political process. What does that look like? You can go to your state party, and even if you are of one ideology or another ideology, and this party is moving in a direction you don't think they should move, tell them no, this is not what we should be doing, you know, because these folks, our leaders, our elected officials, are going to do what they think that we want them to do. And they're going to go over the people who are the loudest at telling them what to do. But unless we insert an alternative narrative, an alternative way of looking at this, they're going to think, I'm right, I'm doing what my constituents want, until we vote them out and tell them, actually, that's incorrect. So really empower your clients to engage in this process, engage with those school board meetings, do those things on the local level. And even the national parties have been trying to educate people on, it's not all about who you vote for at the top of the ticket. It's about what's going on locally for you. So that's just a way to kind of keep that in context.
And I'll just follow up by saying many of your state organizations have government relations boards. I sit on the board for Louisiana. I'm in that committee, and we have had so much movement. I can tell you in Louisiana last year, we looked at probably 50 bills and gave our opinion and provided our opinion, not just to legislators, but also to our state board in terms of how that would affect current clients, potential clients, past clients, the profession as a whole. And so check out your local board websites and see if there's a way for you to become involved. I didn't know what I didn't know until I got involved. All right, I think we've covered most of the questions. So this is going to be a series, guys. Thank you for the faculty who bravely and courageously went today, though Dr. Troutman kids about there being a rubric. There is none. I think you all did an amazing job. I will tell you the topics for the rest of them. Now, remember, our next town hall is not a town hall in the traditional sense. It will be our virtual conference. Remember, as a student, you can attend as many and all of those sessions that you want to attend. It's going to be a great place to hear diverse perspectives and opinions about a variety of things. And after that, going into summer 2, we will continue on with our series. We'll be talking about, Colleen, do you want to tell them the schedule? You're muted. There you go.
Let me find it. We have assessment next, so information about assessment, which will be followed by case conceptualization following term. And then let's see, so that's summer 2, fall 1, and then fall 2 would be intersection of morals and ethics, which kind of echoes some of the themes from our virtual conference. So it'll be a good way to kind of pick up from there. So please let us know if you do have any ideas for future town hall topics. One that I really want to get going is having our faculty talk just about what we ended with advocacy in the community, and really talking about how they are impacting their community. So feel free to let me know if you do have any other ideas, and we are over time. So thank you all for coming tonight.
Thank you.